All right, boom, we're officially recording. Um, this is our 48th knowledge drop. We're almost up to 50. It's crazy. And thank you guys for tuning in wherever you are around the world. I'm in Greece currently, as you see by the lovely shutters here. And Becca, where are you? Are you back in New York or where are you? Brooklyn. Brooklyn represent. Cool. And let me just go through the housekeeping stuff real quick, and then I'll pass it over to Becca to do her slide deck. And then hopefully at the end, we'll have like 5 or 10 minutes for you guys to actually ask some live questions. We can have a little chat there at the end about all the stuff you hopefully learned from her slide deck and inspiration and new ideas you have for how to learn new languages for travel, which is our topic for today. Super fun. So a couple housekeeping things. You guys have already found the question and answer box. Make sure it's just set to all panelists and attendees if you want to make sure, have everybody see what you're typing. But feel free to keep it lively in there as we're going through the slide deck. And then also you'll find the question and answer box at the bottom of the Zoom room too. So if you want to have questions get answered by Becca at the end, that's a good place to store those, and we'll go through those at the very end of the call as well. So feel free to just use that as Becca's going through a slide deck. And as I mentioned, this is getting recorded, so this will live in our YouTube Knowledge Drop archive, where all of the previous 47 knowledge drops currently live and will live on for as long as YouTube and the internet exists. So you guys can share this video, rewatch it, send it to a friend that's hoping to learn a language and it's like, how do I get started? This would be like the perfect little 30-minute video to send them. But with all of that out of the way, let me pass it over to my friend Becca, who is habloing all the idiomas and, very, very good with this stuff. So she's the perfect person to cover this subject. So let's jump into it. You're out on me.
Yay. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Morning from Brooklyn. It's beautiful here. I was on remote year Kalo, which ended December 29th of last year. I traveled in Asia a bit after that, and now I'm living in Brooklyn. So I'm going to share my screen.
Let's do it.
Let's see. Ta-da!
Ba-ba-ba.
Here it is. So I hope everyone's excited because today I'm going to be sharing a bunch of ways that I have learned and picked up a bunch of languages over the years, and a bunch of quick tricks and tips that you can do either on your own or with friends or in a group to pick up a language fast and in a way that suits your learning style. I know a lot of people couldn't make it today, so this is also going to be available later, like Travis said, and we can jump right into it. So today's knowledge drop is learn languages like a pro. You can do it. So first, think about a time when you were in another country and wanted to express yourself, no matter where that was. Maybe it was somewhere on remote year. Maybe it was somewhere you went as a kid or went on your own recently. Think about a time you wanted to express yourself or make an argument or share your opinion or give a compliment or make a friend. Could you do it? And of course, it's really hard to do this when it's not in English or your native language, but here are a few ways where you can kind of break the ice. So what's about to drop? Tips and tricks for learning new languages for travel, which is something we all love to do. And why I'm doing it, I have learned and taught myself 6 or 7 languages, or some of them, over the years, and it has vastly altered my experiences in traveling. I also taught English to children whose first language was not English. And this really helped get my perspective on the other side of the teaching rather than learning and using them both together. So my jobs currently, I work in vendor management at a translation firm that's headquartered in New York, although I was doing this job remotely on remote year. I'm a blogger and writer with Half Half Travel, which is a brand that I manage for me and my boyfriend. I'm a freelance writer in lifestyle and photography. I'm a freelance photographer, recently starting a new business with my boyfriend. We're taking photos of babies and families in the New York area. And I worked abroad in China from 2010 to 2012 after my study abroad in Hong Kong, which was in 2009. So those are places I've spent some time abroad, immersed in a totally different culture, aside from remote year, which I did last fall. So, have you ever thought about how learning a language could change your life? Think about that for a minute. In summary, this is how I became the girl people introduce as the friend who knows lots of languages. I started studying Spanish in middle school, high school, college, travel, practice, reading the news, watching TV, ordering tacos, and on remote year through 4 Latin American cities where I practice Spanish every day. I started learning Chinese when I was 16 in high school. I continued in college. I had a minor in Mandarin Chinese. I studied abroad in Hong Kong, and I worked abroad in Shanghai, like I just mentioned. Hebrew I started learning as a kid, as a lot of Jewish kids in the suburbs or cities do, and then I forgot most of it. And then I was lucky enough to learn it again in college by traveling and meeting Israelis. And then I went to Israel again, where I got to be exposed all over again. Japanese, I took 1 college course. I retained it afterward by reading candy packages and practicing on apps on iPads back when those were popular. French and German, I kind of absorbed from work. French because it's a Romance language, and German because my company works with companies in Germany, and we have clients in Germany. And so time to time, I see things in German, and I've picked up some basics. I also tend to read ingredients on packages in other languages when I have to do that, because I'm allergic to a lot of things. So here's all this in French. And I can pretty much get by figuring out what this is, especially, luckily, this time it has English next to it. Arabic, I took a class for adults almost 2 years ago, and Arabic is one of the hardest languages I've ever been exposed to. It is crazy. I thought knowing Hebrew would help me through it, but it turns out they're pretty different because of the reading. So I forgot most of that, but I definitely gave it a shot. And then Russian, I took 2 classes in my earlier 20s in New York, in Brooklyn. After that, I was able to practice with Uber drivers. I don't know if this is covering it like it is for you. There. Practiced with Uber drivers, traveling. And I just went to Eastern Europe for the first time last year, where I was able to kind of use Russian whenever it was on a sign. Usually I would be in like an Uber or a taxi, and I would say like hello if I saw their name was like Vladimir or like Igor. And they would say, oh, like, are you Russian? And I'd say like, нет, yeah, I used to шала по-русски в классе в Brooklyn. And they'd be like, oh, you speak Russian? I'd be like, no, like just a little, like, take you out, haha. And then Korean, I decided that this was an alphabetic language that I could pick up on an app if I tried. So I did. I gave it a shot over like 2 bus rides, and I came out kind of having familiarity with the Korean alphabet, which anyone can do if they really put their mind to it. And then Vietnamese, I learned from an app. And then over 4 weeks of being in Hanoi, just this past winter in January, I kind of came out with some basics. And while it's impossible to pronounce all the words, you can get by reading it. Really try. So how can you learn a language? Because I just discussed how I learned a bunch of languages. You can do all these 10 tips, which I'm going to outline in the upcoming slides. So feel free to jot anything down. This is all going to be available later, as Travis said. And we are going to check out these methods and the types of people that they're for, because not everyone learns in the same way. Anyone who's ever tried to teach someone something or tried to learn something, you know that everyone picks up and absorbs information differently. So let's check it out. So the first way is download free apps. And while this seems second nature to me, I feel like maybe it's a new idea to some people who never considered that you can learn a language and a lot of vocabulary and even get some audio kind of thrown to you through your headphones by getting a free app. So this is best for people who like learning while they're on the go and people who like repetition and games. And one of the best apps I've found recently, because I've been through a whole bunch of them, is called Drops. And there's a sample of a screenshot on the left for if you're doing it with Japanese. So in the middle, it's giving me this word that usually it introduces you to a bunch of words in a list like before you get tested on them. But this is Japanese for, it says hi, which is yes. So then you have to click which emoji corresponds with it. And I would probably go with the check mark. And then it like makes you feel great. And it also times you to like 5 minutes per day. So it kind of like makes you look forward to doing it again. Because if you're like, oh, I want to do 6 minutes, you have to do it like a bunch of hours later when it pings you that it's ready for you again. So to get apps like this, as I mentioned, Drops, or there's really just so many of them that are good for different languages, I search the App Store for learn whatever language free easy. And I see which apps are free. And then I get a bunch of them. I see which ones are good. I see which ones are bad. I delete the ones that aren't great. And I kind of like keep going with the cool, like, you know, fun ones. So the next way is watch foreign language TV. And maybe you've been surfing the channels at home and you see something come on in Spanish, or maybe you live in a community where there's, you know, any type of other population that has a TV station. So when I used to watch Sábado Gigante, And I think that Spanish soap operas are hysterical, but kind of hard to follow. At the gym recently, or a year ago when I had a gym in my building, I found Caso Cerrado, which is basically Judge Judy, but in Spanish. And it's really funny, but it's also really engaging, and it's really dramatic. But I watched it with subtitles, and this helped me learn a lot about like legal Spanish, learning about like the types of arguments these people are getting into. And watching things that kind of are less scripted is also better for learning like, language that's not in a script. So also this is best for people who learn by seeing and hearing, and people who like absorbing language through culture. Because some people like books, but some people like absorbing through what they're watching. Another way to do this is to watch airplane movies with foreign subtitles or dubbed in another language with English subs. So I recently did this during remote year on our transition day. I think we flew every time. But I watched Crazy Rich Asians 3 times, once in English, and then once in Spanish, I think with English subs, and then once in Spanish with Chinese subs, to kind of like see, having known the context and how the story was going to go, it taught me how to say those things, even though I was very familiar with them in Spanish and Chinese. And then here's just another example of watching something with dual subtitles. This can be really helpful. Downloading free news apps. So this is not for every beginner, but it's definitely helpful once you have a handle on a language and you want to practice in a very like applicable and current way. I would say this is good for people who enjoy the news and for picking up cognate words, and for people who learn visually and with context. So with the news, you'll already have an edge in learning or practicing because so many of the ideas, names, and places are familiar. And this is how I've picked up words in Spanish that deal with politics, sports, breaking news, and culture. And it's really interesting because a lot of the names stay the same. So if there's an article about, Obama, miss you, Obama, that's one thing you know already. And then you can kind of get the context clues based on what you've read in English, see that in Spanish, and get a gist of it, and also pick up the words that are similar, like how to talk about elections in Spanish, because that's like a current topic. So that can be really interesting. A lot of these apps are free also. Another more, you could say, old-fashioned method is flashcards, but I have done this as well. Flashcards are good for people who like learning while on the go, people who learn by repetition, and people who learn from their own handwriting, which is something that visual learners might want to do. And while this sounds old-fashioned, when I lived in China, I'd make flashcards of every word I learned, and I practiced during my commute. I would make a pile for the ones that I got wrong, and I would make myself do them again during my subway ride, and I would put the ones I got right in another pile, kind of to congratulate myself that I got them. So if you are someone who likes writing down things in notebooks or writing things, with a pen, kind of not in your phone, this can be a great way to feel very hands-on. Next is take a class for adults. And one thing as a disclaimer, there's no shame in taking a class for adults. There's no shame in getting back into a classroom as an adult. And there's definitely no shame in learning something totally new that is a great conversation starter and a great thing to say that you got into in a new year. So this is great for people who are learning groups, people who like the pressure of having to go to class in order to learn a skill, and people who like learning from an expert, or in this case, a native. So in classes during my adulthood, so totally past college, I learned Russian and Arabic in group class settings with Fluent City, which is a language learning school. It's only like 5 years old, and they have locations in several cities in the US. They also offer online classes, both I think in group settings and with private tutors. So if you're interested in taking a class from anywhere, you can check out what their current offerings are, and they're probably really rolling out a lot of online stuff. Just because of people who have busy schedules and don't live in one of their cities. So you can also take a class for expats if you're living abroad. And this is definitely a very popular thing to do. I know all over Latin America, there are schools for travelers and for expats. And sometimes it comes down to finding the right one for you, or being in a place where you can make that a reality. Number 6 is related to class, but a ton more casual, finding a free language exchange. And this is also a good way if you want to meet people in a new city where you might be traveling alone or where you've just moved to, whether that's in the US or in your home country or very far abroad. So free language exchanges are best for people who learn socially and casually. And if you browse meetup.com or I'll get to Facebook, you can find heaps of language exchange types of meetup environments or events. So for example, recently I was in Hanoi and I was in Taipei in Taiwan, and I joined Facebook groups for expats. And they would always post in Taiwan, there was a organization that had a weekly meetup, so it was every Friday. And in Hanoi, there was a group that met kind of like Tuesday nights at a cafe, and there were board games, and they would get like tons of people. So these are usually for people who want to learn the local language or teach English to a local while learning the local language. And sometimes, you'll get people who speak multiple languages, and you might meet someone from France in Hanoi who can help you learn French, and that can become a possibility for you. So language exchanges are cool because you can also come out of them with friends. They usually don't cost money. They'll usually be somewhere nice, like at a bar or a cafe. And it's definitely a good way to network as well. Number 7 is talk to real humans. So a lot of people, or some people, kind of get scared in speaking a new language because they don't know how they'll sound. They don't want to sound stupid. They might not want to speak if they are ashamed of the accent they haven't perfected yet. But talking to real people who speak a language is good for people who like talking, people who aren't afraid to mess up, and people who like getting corrected. So as examples, I often text with my friends in Argentina in Spanish. Maybe we leave each other, voice messages. And I'm really happy when they correct me because they are real people who are really from Argentina. And I'll also ask them like, hey, I'm writing this like work email in Spanish. Can you tell me if all the grammar is correct? And they'll say like, yeah, I would tweak this and this, but the rest is good. I also learned a lot of Chinese by totally just talking to taxi drivers in Shanghai. Even when I remember my first week, I didn't even know how to say phone card, because that was never something I had learned in a book in my classes. And there's probably a different way of saying phone card, like regionally and, in different countries. So my accent also kind of was not great, but I kept talking to taxi drivers. And the more you talk to people, the more you realize how they say things that you want to say and how they should be said. So I also knew I would never see them again. So if I messed up, it was also fine. So that's something great to do. It's definitely scary for some people to learn another language because you might fear people judging you or making fun of you if you're wrong. But the fact is that a lot of native speakers want to help you, kind of because they're the expert, and they will definitely help you along the way. So as a first few challenges to yourself, you can try ordering your taco in Spanish, no matter where in the world you are, if the person serving you speaks Spanish, your pho ga in Vietnamese, your croissant in French, and you can get your bao in Chinese if you can try to do that. Definitely be open to learning from being corrected. And another great way to learn, especially when you're abroad, is to say, what's this, and point to something in a market. And then you'll probably learn the local way to say it, which is great when there's new fruits that you're being confronted with and you don't know what they are, and new vegetables and the local ways to say things. Okay, so moving on, and this is, again, for maybe you've had some experience in Spanish or French and you're ready to give yourself a big challenge. Read a book in another language. And this is best for people who are patient with themselves, people who learn visually, and people who like reading books. So as a challenge to myself a few years ago, I think I read it twice. I read Harry Potter in Spanish, which was Harry Potter y la piedra filosofal. And it was awesome. It was also hysterical because it made Harry Potter sound a lot like a fiesta. And if you read this very slowly and you need to look up lots of words, that's totally fine. I would probably sit next to the book with Google Translate because I hadn't known how to say wizard or spells or, all the types of specific like magic words that there are in there. It's also okay to read children's books. There's no shame in that because learning animals is fun. And you can also read poetry for kids or teens because it'll probably be a bit simpler. And before becoming fluent, reading things for kids is really fun. And then this idea came from Travis, but try to get a tongue twister to practice and then look up what it means. This is also good if you're running short on time. Maybe you want to look at a tongue twister per day. And I found this one in Chinese. That's one of the most famous Chinese tongue twisters, and I'll do it for you right now. It goes, 44, 10, 10, 10, 14, 14, 14, 40, 40, 40, 44, zhi, shi, 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 zi, shi, si, de. Wow, that was crazy. So what it means is 4 is 4, 10 is 10. 14 is 14, 40 is 40, 44 lion cubs are dead.
That was my favorite 20 seconds of a knowledge drop ever, by the way. That was totally insane.
Wait for the song. Okay, so next, listen to music. This is best for people who learn audially and love music. I started listening to Chinese pop music in 2010 with the coworkers I had in my office there. And once I looked up the lyrics, it started making sense. And then I started asking my coworkers what the phrases meant, and I learned some slang. I actually remember I printed out, and I found it in my purse years later. I printed out the lyrics to a song so that I could like look at it again and again on the subway. And it really helped me like figure out Chinese like pop love songs. So that was pretty cool as like a newcomer to mainland China as an expat. It helps to look up the lyrics as you listen to combine listening with reading. And another one of my favorite songs, if you want to practice Spanish, is La Gozadera by Gente de Zona and Mark Anthony, because it mentions tons of countries in Latin America that you could pick out. The first time you listen to it, it says like something Venezuela, da 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 da, and it's great. But as an English speaker, you can pick up a lot of it. But then once you look at the lyrics in Spanish and figure that out, it's talking about like all these things from all these countries. And lastly, there's no shame in listening to children's songs. And right now is the musical component of the knowledge drop where I'm going to sing in Chinese. This is a song called Liang Zhi Lao Hu, which is kind of a joke among all of the expats in China that you've probably learned it from your private tutor, or you've learned it in your class, or you've learned it somewhere, but it's like basically a Chinese nursery rhyme that all of these like adults from other countries are learning in China, and it's a big joke. So it goes like this. 两只老虎，两只老虎，跑得快，跑得快，一只没有眼睛，一只没有尾巴，真奇怪，真奇怪. And what it means is two tigers, running fast, running fast. One doesn't have eyes, one doesn't have a tail. It's so strange, it's so strange. I hope that was awesome, as it was for me. Travis is having a blast. Okay, so the last tip here is to use your flight as motivation. Maybe you have just booked a trip to somewhere you've never been before. So for me, I would say the time I can pick out where I used my flight as motivation to learn a language was the first time I went to Portugal. And it was the first Portuguese-speaking country I was ever going to. I've now been there twice because I love Portugal so much. But this is best for people who use things they buy to motivate themselves to change or improve. So if you think about this like buying pants a size smaller, then it's motivation to fit into them. I know everyone can relate, probably, unless you hate pants. So the logic is, now that you've dropped a few hundred or 1,000 or all of your miles on a flight to X country, start learning that language to make your trip more enjoyable and meaningful. So first, you can start researching where you're going. What language do they speak? And are there alternate official languages? For example, in Morocco, should you learn Arabic or French? Maybe ask someone who's been there. Will you be able to use Russian in Latvia? That's something I figured out when I went there. And how many alphabets does Japanese have? Because you can't really choose to learn just one. It won't totally help you get around Japan because there's 3. So if you think about the flight, like pants a size too small, and you work toward being as linguistically prepared as you can be, you can fit on that flight. That's one way to think of it. So finally, here are some keys to success. And we're a little over time. Don't expect wild change overnight. Don't get frustrated by things like pronunciation, spelling, or listening, and instead try a different learning technique, because I've listed 10 that are all for different types of people. Lastly, don't give up. Do practice gradually, stay committed, try different methods for learning, and have fun. So here's your to-do list that you can kind of even start on as soon as today. Choose a language, or 2 or 3. Figure out which way you learn best. Could it be visual or in groups? Choose your learning strategy, and then practice. And then try a new strategy. Maybe it'll be TV, or listening to music, or taking a class, or attending a language exchange to spice it up. Then celebrate your success and then keep going because you can always, and I mean always, improve. So I guess we can open it to questions. This is my thank you page. Thank you. Gracias. Toda. Spasiba. Merci. Danke schön. Let's go back. Oops. This is how to get in touch with me. You're welcome to get in touch with me and let me know, what you're doing and how it's going. But I'd love to get some questions right now if there are any.
Awesome. Why don't you jump back out of screen share, Becca, and then, hopefully you guys can pop questions in the chat box or the Q&A box. I'll start with one really quick, though. Like, just listening to you talk about languages and, doing nursery rhymes in Chinese and stuff. Do you have the sense that, like, you're just good at languages? Or do you feel like, where do you fall in that kind of conversation? Like, do you think some people are just naturally gifted when it comes to language? Or, yeah. Because, like, I feel like I'm not, like, I feel like you are. Like,
that's fair. I was thinking about that this morning because I'm not perfectly fluent in any of these. Like, I grew up speaking English. I'm an English-speaking American person. There are definitely people who have a gift for this type of thing. I think travel motivates me to learn more about languages. So, like, to me, I love going to Latvia and speaking some Russian. Like, I think that is cool. Whereas other people would think, like, something else is totally cool, like setting up Wi-Fi, like your proposition college drop channel. Like, I don't think that's cool. So, and like, this is something I am good at, which is why I'm dropping it as a knowledge drop today. But there are things I'm terrible at. Like, this is something I enjoy, and I enjoy the challenge, and I enjoy what it gives me. But I'm very bad at math, like terribly, bashfully bad at math. So, this is something I'm good at that I like to practice at.
Nice. We are at time, like you mentioned, but we have a fun question that came through, so we'll close it down on this. Hallie's asking, what's the next language you would love to learn?
So last week I downloaded an app for Ukrainian because I would like to go to Ukraine. And I was wondering how much it has in common with Russian. So the answer is here and there. Yes, it has things in common, like confusingly so. Like, the numbers are similar. The hello, how are you is like a little off. But that happens among lots of Slavic languages, where if you go to Russia and you go to the Czech Republic, they call water voda, and a beer is also piva, and you say dobry utro, which is dobry den in Czech. So, Any other questions?
Yeah, it's got to be fun when you start to, like, learn enough languages where you, like, see all the crossovers and like where the Venn diagrams have the middle space and, like, it's the same word or the same root.
It's very cool. I work a lot with this for my job. I've had to research languages. I've had to look up languages that the average person has not heard of or dreamed of, like dialects of Dutch that come from islands in the Netherlands, and Aztec and Mayan languages that still exist in Mexico that there are people speaking in the U.S. migrated here. And, dialects from India, there's like 80, and dialects from China, there's tons. Every village has a dialect, or so it's like a really fascinating thing once you start looking at that. One more really interesting thing, Finnish is not like Swedish, even though the countries are next to each other. Finnish is more like Estonian, and then the only other country that's virtually related to either of those is Hungary. Hungary has nothing in common with the countries around it. Yeah, so I picked up like lots of like really random stuff. If you've ever any questions about rare languages or anything that deals with like language learning techniques.
Cool. Actually, one more thing before I close it down, because like I think for a lot of people, it's like, we show up in a new country and maybe we learn like, what you asked me earlier of like, how, like what's thank you in Greek? Like we'll try to learn like, thank you, you're welcome, goodbye, maybe the bathroom, like some basic stuff. But like, what's your advice? Because I feel like it's like with anything else, like, and then I mentioned guitar earlier too. It's like with anything like a language or surfing or guitar, there's like a point where it becomes fun and then you actually are just doing it because it's fun versus it feeling like a chore. So like, do you have any advice for like helping people get past that? Like, I just know a few words to like, oh, I can actually like relate and have conversations with people and this became fun now. But like how to get past that point where like, I don't know, you're just trying to learn new vocab and stuff to like where you can actually talk to new people and like have these new connections where like that's where like the magic moments come from, It's like, I don't know.
I've only really started having like the magic moments in Spanish and stuff since being in Latin America like lots of times, and then for one time for almost 5 months. I think a lot of it comes from learning in a variety of ways, because if you keep reading, you're never going to be able to still like talk to the guy who's selling you your tamales and ask him about his day and what's inside the tamales and how he makes them. And if similarly, if you are only working on speaking and listening and you can't really spell, how are you going to ever write your landlord or your Airbnb host a full email in Spanish without getting lots of help? So like kind of, I guess, rounding out the whole skill set. So if you feel you're plateauing in one kind of area, to work on another via one of these ways, whether it's listening to music and getting better at like picking out words, and figuring out the whole like idea of the lyrics, or getting down to reading a book or something.
Cool. That's awesome. That's awesome advice, actually. Because like, I feel like I haven't tried like 8 of the 10 things you mentioned on the call today. So thanks for all those amazing 10 ways. Thanks for doing the knowledge drop. You're a gem of a human. I appreciate you doing it. And thanks to everybody who joined out there, wherever you are in the world. Appreciate it. And you can find the recording of this on our YouTube channel, like I mentioned earlier. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with the 49th ever knowledge drop, which is pretty fun too. So see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.